Welcome back to another episode of the Meat Mafia podcast. If this is your first time joining us, we have one goal and one goal only, and that is that you, yes, you, listen to this podcast and get at least one valuable piece of information that inspires you to go radically change your health today. If this is your second, third, fourth, or 100th time listening to the Meat Mafia podcast, we are so grateful to have you, and we are so thankful for your continued support. Before we get going, if you would not mind going and following us on all of our platforms, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and of course, Twitter, we would greatly appreciate it. This just allows us to expand our reach, and your reviews, comments, and feedback give us more and more things to think about and improve the show with. Lastly, this is a user-supported podcast and newsletter, and we would not be able to do what we love doing without your generous support and the support from our sponsors. We take great pride in the relationships that we've built with our sponsors and truly believe that they are the best resources out there for better health. Your support and their support, and you supporting them, means the world to us. If you are enjoying the podcast and getting value out of it, please check us out on the Fountain app below, where you can support us by streaming us sats or sending us support via our Fountain Bitcoin wallet. Without further ado, here is a word from our sponsors. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Carnivore Bar. The Carnivore Bar is a veteran-owned, animal-based company focused on bringing you the highest quality pemmican product on the market. Pemmican is an ancient tradition practiced by American indigenous cultures, and it's focused on simple ingredients: beef, tallow, and salt. It's built for grab-and-go snacking, and it's a great sort of travel, hiking, or school lunch snack. And it's really built for those long-lasting days where you can just run on basically no fuel other than just simple fats. It's rich in saturated fats and provides everything you need to sustain long-lasting energy throughout the busy day. In my opinion, this is a product that is an absolute must, so go check it out in the link below. Also, check out our podcast with the founder, Philip Meese. He does an incredible job breaking down the mission and the passion behind the company. And I think if you're interested in animal-based nutrition, Philip will inspire you with his product. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Holy Cow Beef. Holy Cow Beef is regeneratively raised, grass-fed, grass-finished beef raised right here in Lubbock, Texas. Regeneratively raised, grass-fed, grass-finished beef is the gold standard of beef, and Ann and Weldon Warren have made it their lives' mission to provide incredibly high-quality beef to their local community and beyond. They have been raising their animals this way for decades. In fact, they were some of the most influential voices for getting grass-fed and grass-finished beef in Whole Foods back when Whole Foods was a startup grocery store. They were influential in setting the AGA standards, which is the American Grass-Fed Association, so you know they are doing things the right way, and on top of all of that, their beef tastes like butter. Grass-fed, grass-finished beef provides a superior omega-3 to omega-6 ratio than your typical beef, or in other words, it causes less inflammation in your body. So you are promoting a high protein, high fat diet with this amazingly high quality beef, and saturated fats are playing their critical role in benefiting your body through supporting hormonal functions and cellular functions. And if you're looking for the highest quality beef, look no further than Holy Cow Beef. Leave your butcher box, that Australian and New Zealand raised meat, in the cart and order from your friends Ann and Weldon Warren over at Holy Cow Beef. I almost forgot the most important part there. Ann and Weldon Warren also accept Bitcoin as payment, so go check them out at their website in the link below, and you can pay in Bitcoin or in cash if you're looking to save your Bitcoin. I don't know about you all, but I am all about rewriting the incentives when it comes to healthcare, and Crowd Health is doing just that. Crowd Health is essentially crowdfunding for healthcare with a small HSA component mixed in. Paying through the nose for health insurance you may never use, only to be turned away when you actually need it, is incredibly frustrating. Also, the exorbitant costs of health insurance has so many baked-in premiums that when you compare settling your doctor's bills by paying in cash versus using insurance, the cost is astronomical. So crowdfunding allows you to settle your medical bills in cash and then get the funding you need from your group through Crowd Health. This is a great alternative to health insurance for people who are low risk, healthy people who just want peace of mind knowing that if anything actually did happen, they do have a pool of funds to pull from to cover their medical costs. The best part, my group is saving a portion of the monthly opt-in in Bitcoin, and the rest is in cash. So those savings are going towards actually preserving long-term value for my group through a vehicle like Bitcoin. We are really excited about this concept, and since the business model is predicated on an incentive-based healthcare, it is a great concept. For people with low risk, minimal healthcare costs, it is a no-brainer. Go check them out in the link below and use our promo code MAFIA for a discount on your first 6 months with Crowd Health. Dustin, what's happening, man? Thanks for taking the time to talk to us. We're excited for this one.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we're pumped. We were saying that you come highly recommended by a close friend of ours that's a big fan of what you're doing. And, we've been really enjoying following you on Instagram and just your journey to self-sovereignty and everything you've got going out in Washington. So I think, man, just to start off the conversation, we'd love to just learn a little bit more about you and your background and really what's led you to everything that you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, the cliche, it's a long and twisty road for people that do weird things. But, I started out this life as a pretty normal person. I was raised in the suburbs. I got tricked in high school to go to college. I was going to Washington State University. I started for business. I went for a year. I realized that was a waste of time. And I switched to an agricultural degree. I made it another year before I realized college in general was just not for me. And I was not liking what they were pushing down my throat. So I left to pursue a business in the burgeoning medical cannabis industry that was firing up in Washington. I had been involved in the pre-medical, and then medical started getting pretty big here, and then into legalization. And during that whole time, I started listening to a podcast called the Survival Podcast, Jack Spirko, and he's all about preparedness for if times get tough and even if they don't. And I realized that I was not prepared for anything. I was eating a standard American diet. I was basically living in my car, working 24/7 at that point. And I went to my business partner and said, dude, we got to buy some land or I'm going to lose my mind. Like the world might end tomorrow. It might not, but I'm just not comfortable. So we spent a year looking all over Washington and Oregon, and we settled on a property down in Southwest Washington. We bought 20 acres on a south facing slope. I toured a whole bunch of permaculture farms during that time to kind of see, get an idea of what I was getting into, and got a lot of really good ideas. So we bought a property that was facing the sun, which is really important up here in Washington. It's on the west side of the Cascades, so it gets a lot of rain, and it was fully treed and forested, mostly native regrowth with a little bit of like unique plants that the hippie that owned it before me had planted. But he owner financed us the property. There's no way I would have been able to afford to buy a property at that point. The banks, even now, when I'm much more successful and have a lot of history of doing business and paying a lot of taxes, it's still very difficult to get a bank to finance you on raw land. So I owner financed that property, which I think we put 10,000 down, and it was 50 grand over 7 years. Again, for 20 acres. And I worked out the payment to be $420 a month. Just as kind of that ended up with a decent little balloon payment at the end, but I think it was worth it. It was kind of, I at that point, I was like, well, no matter what happens, I could always go work a minimum wage job and make this payment. And at the end of it, at the end of 7 years, and this was in 2012, I'll have land outright. And then as long as I can maintain the property taxes, which it's in a timber tax classification, so they're almost nothing, at least I'll always have a place to fall back on. And it really became the foundation for a lot of the things that we've done since, other businesses that we've started, other endeavors, because it's kind of like this security that we have that I can always fall back on. Like everything else could just hit the fan and I can always go back to the bug out location. And now we've expanded that into, we own 40 acres up on the hill, and my domestic partner and I, we own another 10 acres down here in the valley on the river where we just built our homestead and we're raising our little family. So over the last 10 years now that we've owned the property, we kind of transitioned from a bug out to get away from people into more of a community-based permaculture, developed system. A lot of it's based forest with the intention of sustaining animals that we rotate through. And a lot of it is based on education and hosting events and doing community and social things. I realize that I'm not a huge fan of like selling the stuff that I grow. I'd rather sell the experience and feed you for free. So we lease another 100 acres and raise cattle on that property, Greg Judy style. Wow. And we sold the beef for a while. I sold it to a bunch of California yuppies. I got into these really small cattle because I could legally sell a 1/8 share. And a 1/8 share of a little Dexter cow fits in the average California yuppie's freezer, and they'll pay a premium. They see me on social media smoking weed with these cows, and they're happy cows, and they're like, "We'll pay whatever futures cows cost. We'll pay for it." So, but I shipping meat was weird, and now I just tell people go find someone local, and if you want to eat my beef, come up for one of our parties. We barbecue, and you're welcome. And that building the relationships is much better, or it's a more valuable form of capital for me these days than the dollars. So yeah, it's kind of in a nutshell how we got to where we are now.
Have you seen a rise in the amount of people who are interested in kind of following along with what you're doing, whether it's on social media or like in person? It does seem like this idea of homesteading and developing hard skills that can help you in tough times or just kind of make you more self-sovereign. People are just drawn to it, it seems. So I'm curious if you've seen that uptick.
Oh yeah, 100%. And, even pre-COVID, it was starting to increase because, 10 years ago, I was still the crazy guy, like the black sheep in the family. Yeah. You can't move to the country and buy land. What the hell are you talking about? You're going to do what out there? Grow food? That's ridiculous. Like you're dropping out of college to do this. What are you talking about? And then, so getting up towards the front end of COVID, slowly people are starting to turn around. Like my parents are like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. Thanks for all the meat all the time. But post COVID, yeah, now everybody's like, oh yeah, we have to escape. The cities are a disaster. So it went from being crazy to being like the obvious thing to do. So yeah, massive uptick.
So is it COVID that ultimately led from that transition from bug out to community experiences that you were talking about?
No, what happened is I started a business in the cannabis industry. It's like a membership discount club. And part of that is we started throwing parties, and I started throwing these parties all over the world. And I realized that I had a lot of fun getting paid to throw parties. And I realized that some of the best experiences I had in permaculture were like large group activities. Not to mention like some of the projects that I have tasked out for the farm are impossible for one person to do or two people to do, very cost prohibitive to have to like hire out a crew. And the best way to do it is to have people that want to learn come out, feed them, and they're willing to work, for a week on end, just gaining the experience. So, just selfishly, I realized you keep calling it self-sovereign, and that's a really good word. People like to call it self-sufficient, and that's not one of my ideals. Like self-resiliency or self-sovereignty, that's great because I don't ever want to be the guy that's making salt, right? I'd much rather just trade for salt or buy salt and extrapolate that out to all sorts of different things. Like for me, it's really easy to grow cows. I've got a nice system. They kind of fuck and multiply, and then I've got beef. It's very simple. I can trade that beef to someone that specialized in something else. That interface right there, people, that's the very important part. We're humans and we're very social beings. So when I lived in the suburbs, the bug out made sense because I was exposed to too many people. When I moved out into the country, I realized, well, this is not enough people. I need some kind of healthy balance in between. So I kind of started finding that pre-COVID. And then my life out here in the rural Washington didn't change all that much during COVID. My businesses and the traveling and all that, I got firsthand experience of how much it changed for a lot of people. So I can see how that could be a catalyst. But I mean, we were already kind of we were definitely already on that path when COVID hit. We had already started building out. We built like a large amphitheater into one of the hillsides on the farm, and we built a large communal kitchen and an event hosting space as well. And we kind of had started all of that pre-COVID. So I think more COVID changed it for everybody else. Everybody else realized, hey, maybe he's right. We do need to get out there and go check out these things.
Equip's unflavored prime has one single ingredient derived directly from grass-fed beef protein. For purists like ourselves who try to only consume balanced, real sources of nutrition, this protein powder checks all the boxes. Go check them out in the link below and use our promo code in the description to get a discount.
Dustin, when you decided to drop out of school, what were those skills that you'd mentioned before that were really important for you to acquire?
You mean like what skills did I have at college that I dropped, or after I dropped out?
I think, and I might have misinterpreted, but I thought that when you had mentioned that when you were thinking about dropping out of school, you were saying something along the lines of like you didn't have the skills that you wanted to have in terms of like maybe like just being able to like take care of yourself or manage land or permaculture or something along those lines.
Yeah, no, it was so. There was only one instance, and it was when I switched from business to ag. It was we were super high, and we'd gone to Taco Bell really late at night, and they didn't have any tomatoes because there was a tomato shortage. And I thought, how is it possible that there's a tomato shortage? What does that even mean? And so that kind of flipped me into ag minded. But no, it wasn't until I had dropped out of college and was on the other side looking at myself like, oh shit, I don't have any skills. This is terrible. What am I going to do? And I had a very lucrative business at that point. That was a huge, if I didn't have that business, I would have toughed it out and made college work because it would have been my best option. But that I lost the incentive for college because my business was doing so well. It was like I'm accruing all this loan debt and not really learning anything of value. I thought maybe the ag school would be valuable. It was ridiculous. It was like, here's how you finance a tractor, and here's how you get into pesticides, and you get the government to pay for the land, and yada yada, all this traditional agriculture. And it turned me off to the whole thing, the traditional side of it. And that really was the breaking point for the college. But it was when I left college that I was a college dropout and had no skills that I really started stressing about not having skills. When I was in college, I was just there drinking and partying with the frat, and I didn't really, look at myself critically at all, I don't think.
Can you walk us through some of the growing pains that you had in those first few years of really making the commitment towards being more independent, buying the land, starting to think about raising your own food? Like, it's such a huge undertaking. I think from the outside looking in, like most people are like, oh my gosh, like couldn't even imagine doing that. So I imagine there's a bunch of growing pains with that.
Yeah, entirely. I had zero experience. I grew in between the first year and second year of college. When I went home, I grew some tomatoes in my parents' yard. And that was kind of like my first real experience of like growing anything other than, a little bit of landscaping with my parents' suburban house and like mowing the yard. So I got my hands a little bit dirty there, and then jumped into a 20-acre parcel and was like, oh yeah, I'll grow a bunch of food. Man, we failed and failed and failed for so long. It really wasn't until we started raising beef in like 2015 that I started producing like a sizable amount of my own food comfortably. Like I saw, okay, this is actually producing more food than the work I'm putting in. Because when we were gardening, it was just endless work for meager output of plants, which I was already starting to get a little, like I was already starting to question the food value of plants versus like the medicinal value of plants. When I did it, we didn't have a whole lot of money, and we definitely didn't have any potential to get the bank to give us any money. So one of my business partner's grandma had an old trailer that she was getting rid of, and she gave it to us. So I spent probably like 2 or 3 days a week for the first 2 years on the property, living in that trailer. And a lot of permaculture teaches you that you're supposed to do an hour of action for every 100 hours of thinking. And the older I get, the more true I realize that is. When we bought the property, my partner and I were 22. And at that point, I was like, nah, that's what old men think. That's bullshit. We'll just do and think about it later. And most of the stuff I did then, I've had to redo because I didn't think about it enough. And so a big hurdle is moving out into the middle of nowhere after living in this suburbs, especially after coming out of I went to Washington State. There's 20,000 kids there in a pretty big town, partying on the weekends, hanging out with friends constantly, to driving in my car all week and going out into the woods and being in the woods basically in solitude with my dogs for a couple of days. It was a huge culture shift. That is not something I'd ever, I was in the Scouts growing up, so we'd have little like weekend things, but I never really experienced being out in the woods by myself in the middle of the winter in a windstorm, So just transitioning from the suburbs to like outdoors was a huge hurdle. That alone was weird. And then I think probably the biggest one was getting my green thumb, slowly learning through failure about soil health and, the soil being integral to the health of plants. And then, furthermore, the integral to the health of the animals that eat those plants, and then thus us. So yeah, learning to live in the woods and getting a green thumb were probably the two biggest hurdles.
Nice. When I'm sure you get asked this all the time, people probably ask you, hey, Dustin, how do I go about getting that green thumb or getting better at permaculture? Is it as simple as like just rolling your sleeves up and going through that process of failing and trial and error? Or now being more experienced, are there resources that you like to point people in the right direction of just to learn more?
Yeah, and it's a combination of both. Consume as much of the literature as possible. We live in 2022. You could learn anything on the internet. I'm sitting in a house that I built because I learned how to build it on the internet, right? Permaculture is immediately available to you, and you can learn everything possible. And then you need to go out and fail on that foundation of education that you've built for yourself. And it's the combination of the two for sure.
Have you always been someone who's just willing to take on these types of projects and just like go against the grain? Or was that something that you slowly started to develop in college? Like, it seems like a unique skill set and trait.
They say that cannabis is a gateway drug, and I think they're right. I was pretty straight-laced until Christmas when I was 18 years old, and my younger brother, who I'd basically bullied up until that point, said, "Hey man, you're such an ass. Why don't you just try smoking some weed?" And for whatever reason, I said, "Yeah, okay, let's go try that." And at this point, I'm being scouted to play lacrosse at the Navy Academy, and I was like, "Yeah, let's smoke some weed." And that changed my entire outlook on life entirely, from top to bottom. I didn't go to the Navy Academy, to the chagrin of my father. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it took a long time for him to come back around, especially after I dropped out. But part of that also is cannabis led me to psychedelic mushrooms, and the way my brain changed after doing large amounts of psychedelic drugs really pushed forward my risk taking, and not risk taking like adrenaline junkie, but risk taking, I would say, professionally or financially. So no, I wasn't always like that, but right about when I hit 18, it completely shifted, and I've kind of never gone back. For better or worse, right? Like there's been a lot of failures, and which is a crucial part of the process. It's how you recover from those failures that matter. So, but taking huge risks all the time leads to lots of failures. The reason that I've built this very strong foundation of preparation through food preps, financial preps, and then out through Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that I could fail almost entirely and still have a fallback. It's like a safety net that I've built for myself, which allows me to take wild risks. And so that's been really helpful.
You mentioned psilocybin kind of changed your perspective on risks. How is that relationship with fear and you kind of just being able to maybe go past a limit that you had previously held in your mind, like helps you continue to just be like, hey, maybe I should try some new angle here with, growing different types of plants or raising different animals, or just kind of like embracing this lifestyle? Because from my perspective, it's like a lot of people want this, but they don't actually act on it. And so I'm wondering if like there was a moment where it was like, okay, this risk is more an optic in my mind than it is really anything real.
Yeah. Looking back on it, there was like a series of events that happened that I had like hardline choices to make. Like, I started so I was just selling a bunch of weed, and my name started coming up in the wrong places. And it coincided with a grow that I had at these football players' house that got raided, and I wasn't there. So they didn't know anything about me, and the players all kept their mouths shut. But that happened right at the same time. So that kind of catalyzed. And at the same time, I'm eating a bunch of mushrooms on the weekends, like barely going to school because I'm in the frat and you don't even really have to go to school. So it all kind of just at once came together, and I made a split decision. Like, I'm out. I was already kind of on the fence about this whole college thing, and now it seems risky to be here. I'm going to leave. It's hard for me to pinpoint exactly how did mushrooms catalyze that change, or like if I wasn't doing mushrooms, would I have made the same choices? Kind of hard to, like quantify that specifically. What I do know is that since consuming mushrooms, I have a much more positive outlook on all aspects of life. So I think when I look at new tasks or challenges, I think I look at the glass being half full most of the time. Like, if and when this succeeds, it's going to be fantastic. And if it doesn't, well, I've learned something and I can keep going. And I really want to emphasize, like, how could anybody else do this? It's on that basis of preparedness. And if you look at the basics, if you get yourself a nice little stockpile of really cheap food, and you get your, a couple months of your income saved up, again, it gives you that freedom to start making bigger risks. And big risks for people listening may not be the same. It's not, I'm going to probably suggest don't go buy 20 acres. If I could go back and do it again, I probably wouldn't have bought 20 acres. I probably would have gone and leased land to raise cattle first. And go look into that if you're interested. But taking okay, was there this new hobby that I'm interested in? Have I been reading about this craft or this skill that I might want to take to the next hobby level? Well, if I have that security platform to work off of, I can take that risk of, okay, maybe on the weekends now, I don't have to work that extra job because I've saved up. So now I have time to start refining my hobby. And at some point, if I find that hobby is enjoyable and I start getting decent at it, maybe I can turn that into a business, right? And now I can start making money off of that. And because of that basis of preparedness that I had, I was able to take those risks. I think that's the more important aspect of it than the psychedelics.
Interesting. So if you could do it again, you'd actually recommend for people that are interested to getting into this space, start leasing land, and beef should be the first animal that you get into?
Yeah. Or, like if you're in the suburbs, go to your neighbor's backyard. You got neighbors with dilapidated backyards. Start with your own backyard, right? Start growing food in your own backyard, get decent at it. Go to your neighbors, say, hey, look what I'm doing over here. Maybe you think I could grow some food over here too? Curtis Stone spin farming up in Vancouver, that was his model and he blew it up. It's really cool. And yeah, getting into leasing otherwise unappealing land, like land that looks like might not have any other use or is overgrown, or it's got some old people that would like it to look nice, but can't really keep up with it anymore. And putting some cows on that property is as easy as it gets. It's, like I said, the most productive system that we have with the least amount of input, for sure. And my mentor on all of that was Greg Judy. I read both of his books, No Risk Ranching and Comeback Farms, and then went and took his class as well in Missouri. And man, is brilliant. If you're looking to get into cattle, you should go take a look at and read his story first. It's powerful stuff.
Is that all beef cattle? Is there some dairy as well? Because we've heard anecdotally that like dairy cows too are also a great way to go about just getting some high quality nutrition. If you can have a wet calf and a mother who's actually creating milk.
Yeah, I'm not particular to dairy cows. All cows, unless you get some very strange African, like hardy African breeds, and even then they produce milk, just not very much of it. But the cattle you're going to find in North America, even in Angus, you can still milk that animal. It's not, you're not going to get Jersey cow level of milk, but Jersey cow is not a very good eating animal. So I'd rather an animal that has good beef and puts off a little bit of milk than an animal that puts off a lot of milk and no beef. And granted, you could have a couple dairy cows and the rest of them be beef animals as well. We run a very, very low maintenance herd. So I spend maybe 15, 20 minutes a week with my animals, more in the summer, less in the winter. And the system is all automated to move them. And we cull based on if you've got horns, you're out. If you're a mean animal, you're out. If you're a sick animal in any kind of shape, way, or form, if you're injured or anything, you're out. And those are kind of like that's on my list right there. And that keeps us at a pretty healthy herd. And I mix in random genetics that I find locally. I got all my animals are local. Like they were already from successful herds that were around me. And that's super important too. If you're just getting into cattle ranching, do not go buy a $10,000 Wagyu bull or whatever and trying to start with that. Odds are he's going to die and you're screwed. Go get some Angus from the guy down the road and learn, a couple of $500. And if you're down in Texas, they're cheap as shit too because of the drought and all that stuff. You can go get animals. People are begging you to take them, like just so they don't have to kill them. I don't know how the drought is right now, but for a while there, it was getting rough down in Texas. And that's the perfect spot to do it because through permaculture, through holistic management, we can take abused property and rehab it. Yeah, you can't grow a feedlot in Texas in a drought. You're going to have a really hard time. You can definitely pulse graze a few animals through a decent sized property and rehabilitate, start to improve the carbon composition of the soil, start increasing the water retention, and start to get back to healthy pasture, even in the middle of a drought. There's guys in Africa doing it with sticks. It's just a guy with a stick and a bunch of cows on basically desert sand, re-greening their desert with cows. And those guys are doing it. There's no excuse for anybody else that's interested not doing it.
That's unbelievable. When we think about actually rehabilitating the land, Dustin, what does that actually look like? What do those practices look like for you?
Yeah, it's intensive. That's kind of the key. It's high pressure, intensive management. So we're taking we're taking some amount of cows and almost overdoing it for a very brief period of time, and then moving them and then resting that piece of land for the time that it takes to grow back. And then when it starts to regrow, we bring the animal back in, and the idea is that we're letting them graze off the top third of what's regrown and then out again. And we're letting it grow back that third that it just grazed, and then some, ideally another 30%, and then back and forth, so on and so forth. And by doing that, the longer the grass blade, the solar collector, the longer the roots, which is where our carbon sequestration comes in. And again, the more carbon, the more water the soil can hold. Also, the more balanced the temperature of the soil becomes. So the longer the growing season becomes, so that this whole system, it starts to cycle faster and faster. And with an end result being that we start growing topsoil at quick rates.
So in terms of restoring topsoil, do you think that cattle is like the backbone of doing that? Or are there any other animals that you put into play there to help out with whether it's parasites or other sort of smaller things like that might, play a factor in other animals' healths?
Yeah, 100%. A monocrop of anything is not usually the right solution. Now, we've done quite a bit of different, systems with our cattle. So the most diverse, we had cattle, goats, and chickens, and that system was sweet. I wasn't able to keep my chickens from getting eaten by the eagles in my area. And then the goats are just a pain in the ass. So just cows by themselves work really well. They attract, in these healthy pastures, especially in my area, they attract massive amounts of birds, like wild birds, from predators to scavengers to, little finches and everything in between. So you go out and look at my cows in the middle of a nice day, there's birds on their back eating the pests that are there. Probably the best system would be, like bison and wolves with a little bit of human like the Native Americans, probably pre-first white colonizer exposure, they were in a very healthy system. The Plains Indians were in a very healthy system with the bison and the wolves. That's probably like peak system. And then all of the other ecosystem that revolves around that, right? All the birds and rodents and everything else that's in that system. But when we're doing it intentionally on land that we own, and we've got, borders that we have to abide by. We can't just graze large herds of bison across the Midwest, apparently. When you've got these healthy systems, they attract quite a bit of wildlife that start to fill in those niche roles anyways.
Is there a big difference between raising bison and raising cattle?
I personally have never raised bison. I would have told you that fencing was a huge part of bison versus cattle, but I got a guy that's just a couple miles up the road that has the jankiest fencing on his bison. It's not even electrified. It's probably like 3 foot tall. It's honestly less than I feel comfortable with my cattle. And he overgrazes the shit out of the pasture, and the bison are chilling. I've never been up that road and seen a bison anywhere, like near the fence, let alone trying to jump over it or get out. So if that's the case, if that holds true, then no, it's basically the same thing. Bison are a little less domestic than cows. And so when you're dealing with bulls, even a domestic bull, cattle, bovine bull will still, randomly turn on you and try to to run you over. And so you extrapolate that out to a bison, a big male bison with his bulls or with his balls, and you might get run over. So that would be my biggest concern with the bison, is handling a big bull.
Have you noticed a big change in habitat ecosystem since introducing animals on the land like cows and goats and chickens?
Oh, 100%. So like the property that we lease, it had horses on it. And most people with their horses are just as bad as it gets. That you want to see mismanaged pasture, go find someone that's got horses. And this spot was no different. We started doing soil testing right at the beginning of when we started, and we're measuring soil depth in a couple spots. And we've gained probably over the last 5 years, we think we've gained about a foot of topsoil.
Wow.
And we've increased basically every nutrient profile. Most importantly, our carbon. We've almost doubled the carbon content of our soil, which is huge. And we've done testing to validate that. White Oak Pasture has done a lot of work to validate the improvement of their soil through their managed grazing, and it's a great resource for anyone that wants to try and disprove what I'm saying here. Versus up on our hill farm, we actually elk fenced out about 10 acres. We've got fenced to keep the elk out while our fruit and nut tree forests establish. And several seasons we've pulsed pigs through, and several seasons we haven't. And it's night and day difference the years that we pulse the pigs through and the years that we don't, on how much more productive everything is. The animals are kind of that are a key part of the ecosystem, just like every other living being that, or in minerals and everything else that's there. Most important is the fermentation process that happens in an animal's gut, and then the poop that results. So the nutrient cycling that happens through an animal is where we're getting, and the bacterial and fungal relationships that poop supports. So without the poop, you run into an issue feeding the bacteria. You'll end up with fungal dominant systems, which in the long term can be very productive, but you're looking at more like old growth forest is fungal dominant versus the plains, grassy savanna. That's all bacterial dominant. So without the poop, everything just goes back into a forest. And forests, for the most part, are only productive on the edges. The internal is just growing carbon into trees. You don't get much. The inside of a forest is, especially an established forest, is much less productive than that edge of a forest. And so using the animals keeps us in that productivity. Like I said, when you bring in the animals to rehabilitate, like desertified, you're looking for that disturbance, that bring them in, let them screw everything up, poop, stomp it in, and then leave. That same thing applies into the forest, into all systems with animals. That's what we're after. Kind of like, you think of the bison in the plains when they were getting pressure from the wolves, they all bunched together, in a circle, put all the small ones in, and then moved away from the bison. But when they're in that stress, that circle, they're stressed out, they're stomping around, they're pooping everywhere, they're destroying any, sod or anything that's underneath them. And then they leave, and they don't come back to that spot for a while because it was scary. There's wolves there. We're like, we're not going back there. Screw that. And they're out. And they may not come back to that spot for a year or more. The productivity in one of those spots behind that system is insane if given the time to rest and recuperate.
Yeah. And when you're incorporating these intensive grazing practices, I'm sure it's probably dependent farm by farm. How long can it typically be before you start to see some noticeable changes in the quality of the soil and the land overall?
Immediate. I mean, so let's look at the Africa example. One of the instructors when I was at Greg Judy's class is Ian McInnes, and he teaches these African farmers how to, just better regenerative practices. And they had a bunch of documentation where they took the cattle and they'd walk them out into the desert, and they'd put them in these little, basically the same kind of circle I just explained. And they'd have the animals stand there for 6 hours or so, kind of stressed out, pooping, stomping around. And then they'd bring them back, and they'd go back and check in a couple of weeks, and they'd find clover growing in the desert. Nobody'd seen clover there ever. None of the grandparents, nobody even it was. And it's not like they brought seeds in. It was just dormant clover seeds from when this sand used to be fertile and, popped back up. They found the same thing there's another anecdote where they said, they planted a bunch of trees after they brought the animals in and planted trees, and they said, oh no, it's molding. They called the designer and said, oh, it's all molding. He said, what do you mean it's molding? They said, there's mold growing everywhere. And he said, what? Send me a picture. And they sent him a picture, and there's a bunch of, mushroom fruiting bodies coming out of the ground where they had done all this. And they're like, well, it's fungi. And nobody had ever seen a mushroom there. The only mushroom that they ever knew was their food was getting moldy. So they're like, it's all moldy. It's ruined. It's like, so the productivity from otherwise would seem like dead land can be almost, immediate. Now, you go out to Death Valley out in the middle of the desert and there's zero water and you try to do this. No, you're probably not going to see clover growing. It takes a while to get the water cycle back in. But for us, working on like a rough pasture that's probably been overgrazed or maybe hayed for the past 50 years, within a year or two, with very little input, if any. We don't feed our animals anything. I supplement them they get a free choice, like buffet of minerals, and that's it. And they kind of at their own will can go and get some of the minerals, and they piss most of it out. They're really good at identifying deficiencies, eating that deficiency, and then, they're very inefficient at uptaking that mineral, which is ideal because then they piss it back out into the soil and it mineralizes their then future food. So without any outside inputs, the cattle can regenerate land very quickly.
Can you speak to what's going on right now in the food system in terms of people who are thinking about regenerating soil, and then the legacy system, which is really supported by high input chemical fertilizers that's really extractive? Because there's a huge dichotomy between those two worlds where like one is actually doing a huge service for people and the planet, and the other one is like desecrating everything at the expense of like feeding the world, so to speak. So it's like we live in this weird point in time where we have a food system that feeds everyone, but is it the best model? Probably not.
Yeah, most overfed, undernourished people of all time. It's like it's a catastrophe, and it's unsustainable. Even the mainstream talks about how many growing cycles we have left, and it's not many. It's like they right now the fear porn is like 25 more productive cycles, and then we're all screwed. There won't be any food. I mean, for a lot of people, that might actually be true. And we got really close over the last year or two with like everything that happened with fertilizers, between production shortages and government influence on, like governments all over the world are like, we're not going to use synthetic fertilizers anymore. And touches to another point, like you can't just turn off that system either without a lot of people hurting, a lot of poor people hurting, right? The whole, any kind of slight change affects poor people that don't have access to producing it themselves. So yeah, our modern food system is broken to the core, or it's maybe not broken, but it's, because there's still people getting super rich off of it, but it's not putting out food that makes healthy people. I think that's the big issue, and is focused primarily on plants and plant slop because that's the most profitable for them. People rage about the meat lobby while ignoring the sugar lobby and say, "Oh, the meat lobby is paying for you to say all that." And it's like, look, I'm not talking about big industrial beef. You shouldn't be eating beef from a CAFO. Like, yeah, if don't eat unhappy animals, and that, you're gonna have to dig pretty deep to first learn what that is, and when you do learn what that is, try to avoid it. Good luck. And it's not cheap, and that's part of why I started doing it myself, because I just couldn't afford to buy the quality of food that I always wanted to buy. Like, you want to eat a steak every night for dinner, that's going to cost you one way or the other. So yeah, it's like, I think it's probably one of the biggest existential crises we face, because you look at this burgeoning healthcare disaster that we have in this country, and most of it could be fixed through diet and exercise, and diet being probably the more important one. And I don't think anybody's, I guess personally, I've kind of given up on caring what other people do for themselves. I try to do the best for myself, put it out there. If you see what I'm doing and you think that might work for you, please ask me questions. I want to help you as much as possible, and that's great. But you can't tell people what to do. You can't tell them that the food system's broken and stop eating Twinkies. They don't care. They don't want to hear that from you. Their life sucks already. It's hard. Even the shit food they already eat is expensive, and you're coming to tell them, "Oh, you got to go raise cows." Most people, when I say, I couldn't raise cows, what the hell are you talking about? Like that it's impossible for me. So I try to just show what I'm doing and how I do it and how accessible it is. And hopefully more people catch on, because the modern food system is a disaster and we're screwed if we don't.
Kind of the best way to influence people, we're finding, is just to stop wagging your finger and just be your own proof of work, and just show people how you're doing things. And eventually they're going to be like, "Oh, Dustin and his family seem incredibly healthy. They seem happy. All right, what are they doing? Let me reach out and learn more." Then they're actually proactively coming to you, as opposed to you trying to push a square peg into a round hole. But you did have me thinking, because you tagged us in that juicy ruby red piece of beef today. You cutting through with that. What was it?
That was an elk that we harvested in the backyard.
Elk.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. That led me to my question. I was going to just ask you, how you and your family just think about nutrition and just eating to feel as good as you possibly can.
Yeah, definitely. We, like basically everyone else, I kind of was raised on a standard American diet. And it wasn't until I was in probably my mid 20s. And I had bought the land, and I learned about permaculture, and I was still not eating super healthy. It was probably about, it was, like I said, it was 2015 when we started raising our own cattle that I really was, and right about then, all my businesses started getting really all my legitimate businesses started getting really successful as well. So we started just eating really well then. And in order to cut costs on food, we just started eating what we were growing. And at the time, it was mostly beef. So my diet kind of shifted to like 75% beef. And I started feeling better than I ever had before in my life. All my blood tests, like in my blood assays were just on an upward track. My testosterone was starting to go through the roof with doing, and it wasn't bad before, but all of a sudden it was, insane. And all we're doing is eating nose to tail these animals that we're raising. And then through my food preps, it's just really like most of my meals are like beef, rice, and maybe a little bit of fermented vegetables that we grew. That's kind of a staple. That's probably 90% of our meals right there is that. And our health from it has blown up. I was already like at a pretty good spot, and I noticed just slight improvements, but my partner, Julia, she really noticed, dramatic differences in, I think, her gut health and just how she felt all the time, by changing into this diet that, and we were both, if you looked at us, you'd say, well, you must be healthy people, right? From the outside, 25-year-olds, not fat, not obese at all, and athletes or former athletes. So, but I felt good in and out, but she kind of didn't feel so good on the inside. But this switch has really been a change for her.
Is there anything in particular about growing your own food and then eating it that you found to be either like spiritually some sort of like connection that brings you more fulfillment, or you just think maybe it's higher quality food because you've raised it yourself, you've seen it from cradle to grave, like what the process looked like, so you have full like autonomy over how they were raised?
Both. I think spiritually, like not with plants, who cares with plants, but spiritually with the animals for sure. Raising cattle and then slaughtering them and butchering them, it's still emotional every time I slaughter an animal that I've spent the last couple of years with, and none of them is, as emotional as the first, right? Like the first time I slaughtered a pig, that was the first animal we ever did, was a pig. That was hard, like killing an animal and then eating it. It's not an easy thing to do. If it is an easy thing to do, you got to go see a therapist immediately. Like you got something wrong with you. If you can just kill them and you're dead inside, that's a real problem. But then on the other side, I know that the animals that we're eating and the plants that we're eating are healthy because of the care that we put into making sure that our soil is mineralized, because it's the biggest issue. And by doing that, the food all tastes better. Mineralized food, the plants especially, but then also the animals that eat those plants, they put off far more, terpenes, terpenoids, all the flavor compounds, all of this stuff. And this is something I learned through cannabis. The healthier the soil, the more terps your cannabis plant puts off, the better it smells and tastes. That goes for your fruit that you're eating too, and anything that you're eating. The healthier the plant, the better it's going to taste. The more resources and freedom basically that plant has to invest into those things instead of just trying to survive. So if your plant's happy and thriving, it's not just trying to survive, it's going to taste better. And the same goes for your animals too. If they're not stressed out all the time, if they're living a comfortable, easy life on healthy plants that they're eating, they're going to taste better. So I guess both, to your question.
Yeah. To kind of shift gears towards the cannabis, because we haven't really talked about cannabis much on this podcast, but even just being in the Northeast, it's pretty clear, like just going to college up there, the weed that people are smoking is just very chemically altered from what it should be. And I'm just curious, like just from your perspective, just growing it and being in that industry, what should people know about actually like sourcing clean cannabis if that's something that they want to consume?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a whole lot different than your food. If you really truly want the best cannabis and you want to know exactly what it is, you got to grow your own. The next best step is to start, find out, I guess, if you've got access to legal weed, go to the store, find out what you like there, and then track that back down to the grower and find their social media and start following the grower and start asking them questions and say, hey, can you post like what nutrients are you using, or do you spray stuff? Can you be more transparent on that if they're not already? Ideally, they already are. Like if they're not, if they're not being transparent about what they're doing to grow that weed, you should already be questioning. Same with your food, right? Like if you can't track back and see exactly, what this food was or what this weed was, how was it grown, then be suspect right there. Like, are they trying to hide something? And then ask them. And if they're shady at all, it's not someone you want to consume. They're probably trying to pull one over on you. If you're buying black market weed, for whatever reason, I don't blame you. A lot of us have been there before. You're probably consuming shit. You're probably consuming cartel grown poison laced weed, like not poison laced, but they use poison while growing the weed to keep the bugs at bay so that they can guarantee the crop. They don't care about you smoking the weed down the road. Fuck off on that. You already bought it. We already got your money. So if you're smoking black market weed, you're probably getting screwed. Plain and simple.
This whole conversation has me thinking about this concept of self-sovereignty that we talked about earlier. Have you sort of started to think in different terms when it comes to like money, in terms of adopting like these different forms of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, any other ways that you've started to think like, hey, how can I create some redundancy in my life so that if shit does hit the fan, I'm protected in other ways other than just food?
Yeah. And again, listening to Jack Spirko really early, I give a lot of credit to of all my different successes to that man. He got me on Bitcoin super early, like 2010, 2011. And so it's hard not to be a believer when you buy your Bitcoins at like $1 or $2, right? When you've got a bunch of them from those days and you just watch this thing explode. But I'm also like a Bitcoin absolutist. Let me dial it back. I believe in the blockchain. I believe in the power of blockchain to take the control of money away from the government and put it into our hands, because blockchain is the first technology that allows me to completely trust the money that you have and are giving to me without knowing you at all. I don't have to have any trust in you personally to trust that your money is good. And before the blockchain, the only one that could do that was the government, and they got their own little grift baked in there. Like they're lying to you on top, but it's a big lie. So we both agree that their lie is the same lie, so we can trust that dollar, even though the dollar is less trustworthy than a blockchain, because you could just be a really good counterfeiter. Whether that matters, if I can spend your counterfeit dollar, that may not matter. But point being, we can control of our currency, our money, away from the government, which is crucial because the government likes to destroy the value of our money to service accrue, which if they didn't do that, I wouldn't care so much that they had control of the currency. But because they just continuously deflate the value of it in our face, I think everybody should have a little bit of gold and silver and maybe a little bit of crypto probably too. But again, when we're looking at being prepared, get your food right first. You can't eat gold, silver, or Bitcoin, and you're going to have a really bad day if you got to trade one of those things for a loaf of bread, right? Like, get your food right first, and then looking at those other investments. But 100%, we should be definitely focused on using blockchain technology to disassociate from the government.
How has your opinion on Bitcoin changed since 2010, 2011, when you originally started buying some of those coins?
Well, at the time, the news was like, Bitcoin is just criminals. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true. And for a little while there, it started to seem like maybe not. But then with this whole FTX thing, it's like, yeah, Bitcoin's just criminals again. Like, just, I don't know. Like I said, I'm still a believer in the technology. I still think Bitcoin's probably going to end up having a dollar value way higher than it currently is. I guess my opinion on Bitcoin is the same as it ever was. I don't fully understand all the technicality of it. It's some pretty deep computer science. I trust a lot of really smart people that have talked about it, that they believe in it. And you shouldn't put all your eggs in the Bitcoin basket. It's kind of like, that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's cool. I got so lucky with it that it's hard for me to have like an objective opinion on it. I look at it and say, obviously, I think it's great compared to someone that bought it I sold some Bitcoin to these guys at like 60 grand. And then when it hit 20, I went back and sold them some more. I was like, man, I feel so bad that you guys, they're like, we're believers. We'll buy more. I was like, okay, but I know you ate shit on this and I feel bad. So I'm sure they have a much different opinion than I do, but I still believe in it for the same underlying reason. Not because you should buy Bitcoin to get rich, not to gamble on it, but because it's this powerful tool that gives us more freedom.
Dustin, something you mentioned earlier, you were talking about these community experiences that you guys are facilitating in your property. Can you talk a little bit on what those experiences are about and what are people really getting by just going to those?
And how can we get?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. We do a whole range of stuff. I host, I mentioned that business that I have, the membership discount club. It's called the Good Life Gang. We do parties all over the world, including I host parties here on the farm. In the fall, we do like mushroom fishing weekend events. We had one a couple weeks ago, had like 30 or 40 people come down. We did one day. We actually ended up doing both days of mushrooms because it rained just an insane amount of rain and blew out the rivers. So we did, but that made the mushrooms insanely good. So we had 2 days of like morning and afternoon mushroom hunts. And then we'd come back and we served people food, a bunch of beef that, from the cattle, and then did some classes like a low tech mushroom cultivation. We did a whole thing on, preservation of different mushrooms. And then we did like a little science session on neurogenesis, which was kind of cool. And then we also host like we've done a couple of general permaculture, like 101 classes with tours of the farm and like, here's things. So we went into this 20 acres. The first thing we did and the first thing we do when we're breaking into a new section of the land, including the new 20 acres next to it that we have, is we come in with an excavator and a bulldozer and just go crazy on building roads and terraces and swales and ponds. And that's gone really well most of the time. And then a couple of times it's failed catastrophically. So, and like right now I built this huge dam and we got this massive rain event before I could get all the grass to grow and it just blew up the dam. Like, there's nobody downhill of me, so it doesn't matter. But if there was, it would have been catastrophic, like landslide, just wild to look at. If the Army Corps found out, they'd be so upset about it. This is why you're supposed to hire. But I can walk people around and say, look, I spent a shit ton of money and this failed. Like, don't do that. You learn from my failure. Here's dams that worked. Here's why. Here's dams that failed. Here's why. Like, so walking people around doing tours of the farm, like, here's trees that worked in this climate. Here's trees that didn't. Here, systems that we've put in that work well, that didn't. So, and a lot of it is what didn't work. That's so valuable. And like, here's new projects, and here's how. Like, here's a part of the raw land. Here's my vision for it. And then if you come back next year, you can see the progress we've made on it. And here's what we've done. And you can see, like, I remember I said the road was going to go that way, and there it is. And we looked at the topographic map, and I showed you where all the contours are. And now you can come back and see the swales and terraces on the contour, and you can start to like see in real life that visualization come to fruition. That's been pretty helpful for people, I think. So those are kind of what we focused on. And then, like I said, we built a big amphitheater. So we haven't hosted a music festival yet, but we've got a big fencing project that we're finishing up right now. And then right after it, we're building a bunch of glamp sites on the property. So maybe next summer, we're going to do a little music festival. Should be a good time.
Oh yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. I'm really inspired by, it seems like you really enjoy kind of like sharing the wealth of knowledge that you've earned over the past several years. Is that something that you think you're going to continue to lean in harder on? Just, kind of spreading what you've learned in that experience just so other people can kind of tap into this new way of life?
Oh, absolutely. Wealthy people, and I'm not talking about rich people, dollars, you got a bunch of dollars doesn't necessarily make you wealthy and doesn't make you happy. Wealthy people are typically happy people. And I like surrounding myself with happy people. And if I can help you be more wealthy and thus more happy, then I've surrounded myself with better people, right? Some of the worst people, and this is most of the time not their own fault, is they're that way because of scarcity or a believed scarcity. They live in this system where they feel like everything's out to get them and they've always been kicked and they're always down and they can't afford anything and everything's fucked. So they're going to go out and, commit crimes to get what they need or feel like they deserve. If you can take that bit out, that scarcity bit, and replace it with abundance, most people in abundant systems aren't committing crime. Like, if you're just fat and happy on fruit and beef, you're not out murdering people or stealing from people. Why would you? So the more people you can get into those systems, I think the better off the world will be for, me and my kids and the future of us.
100%, man.
Yeah, I'm going to keep.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep spreading it.
Right? Keep spreading the positivity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we love it, man. Well, we definitely can sense that abundance mentality. I mean, we've both personally learned a great deal just since we've started getting to follow you on Instagram and just seeing all the awesome stuff that you have going on out of Washington. So, we just want to thank you for coming on the show and appreciate having this conversation. And hopefully we'll get out there and link up in person, because I think that would just be so much fun, maybe for that music festival or something like that.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. I'll caution you to wait until next summer. It's a little bit of a weather shock for you guys down in Austin.
Yeah. Well, we're Northeast guys, though, so we're used to the cold.
Yeah, but you're not used to the wet. It's not even that cold here, although it is kind of snowing outside right now, but it's just wet. I mean, we get like 100 inches of rain a year, so it's a little oppressive in the winter.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's good for the cows. Our grass grows like gangbusters. It's probably the easiest place in America to grow beef.
I would love to know like the difference between the micronutrients in the cows raised in Washington versus the cows raised in Texas, just to see, they're obviously grazing on different grass because there's so much different climate. So, I don't know, just a random thought, but it would be cool to see that.
It'd be hard, you'd have to try to control the variables, like take two pastures and then treat them exactly the same and supplement the cattle with the same, and maybe take one big herd of animals. And I don't know, it'd be interesting. And the most important thing really to me is what's the fat composition, right? Like, right. How are we doing on omega-3 and omega-6s? And yeah, I guess the trace minerals would be the secondary, like what's the difference in the trace minerals? But they probably are pretty similar, would be my guess. Even like feedlot cattle and grass finished cattle aren't that much different from each other. Although I would like to see a little deeper research done on that. But if you look at like Sustainable Dish, her book, it dives really deep into the research on all of that, and it's like there's not feedlot beef is better than no beef is the kind of the conclusion. So. I too would like to see the maybe the mineral composition difference between regional animals. That'd be interesting.
Oh, yeah, that's the thing, is even if you're still only able to eat feedlot beef, it's still better than 99.9, if not 100% of the shit in the in or out of the grocery store. So
yeah, if your food's coming from a box or a bag, then yeah, feedlot beef is going to be an improvement. A McDonald's beef patty is going to be an improvement.
Oh yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
Well, Dustin, it's been awesome, man. And just echoing what Brett said, would love to catch up with you at some point offline and just link up in person. But this is great. Our audience is going to love this. So appreciate your time, man.
Awesome.